Welcome to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast, episode 33.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Comics Coffee Metal Podcast. I'm your host, Don Cardenas. Since I didn't get to put out any recommendations last episode, I wanted to make sure that this episode's recommendations were really top-notch stuff, and they certainly are. But first, there's something else that's been going on the past couple weeks that I want to talk about that I haven't really had a chance to on here, and that is, how awesome is that Godzilla vs. Kong trailer? I am just like watching that thing way too much. I'm watching videos dissecting it. I'm kaiju crazy right now, and I don't know if it's because it's like the first like really big movie to actually be coming out in the past year that I'm excited to see. Though I will be doing it from the safety and comfort of my own home. I'm just really stoked for this movie. I mean, I love Godzilla, have my entire life, and just got a whole new rekindled fire in my belly to appreciate the big G-Man. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be to see a big lizard fight big monkey. So I'm hoping it's good. I'm really hoping it's good. I'm spending a lot of my video watching time just watching stuff about this movie and stuff like that. So here's hoping that the blockbuster weirdness movie release schedule starts off with a bang with this one, because I really like this movie to be top notch. I really liked King of the Monsters. I know a lot of people were kind of meh on it and all that, but I thought it was really fun. And the human stuff was fine. It could have been better, but yeah, we'll talk about more of that later though, another episode. So yeah, I'm just Godzilla vs. Kong. I'm stoked. I need to start going back and reading some Godzilla comics is what I need to do. I know IDW has a ton of great stuff for the comics, and I should really start digging into that. So if any of you have any recommendations for Godzilla comics, not just IDW stuff, but anything, send them my way. I want to read some of this stuff. I want to get, fill those gaps in my Godzilla knowledge. So speaking of IDW and speaking of comics, my first recommendation is from IDW. It is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, granted, this series has been going on for quite a while, but they recently kind of had a reboot of sorts. Previous guest, Sophie Campbell, has been spearheading a massive shift in terms of just stuff going on in that series, and it's all started with issue 101, and that's collected in the graphic novel Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Reborn. They started the volume numbers back for number 1 just to kind of further hammer home that this is a really good jumping on point. I had been reading the IDW stuff since the beginning, since they relaunched it. I was a big fan of it, and around a few years ago, I kind of fell off of it because I kind of fell off buying weekly comics and all that, and I regret doing so. But I was kind of always wanting to go back and seeing what's going on, and there's a lot of great stuff I know that comes before this that I know I will get to, but I kind of want to just like jump back in and kind of have like a fresh start, and get to where they are now. And after speaking to Sophie on our episode, I really wanted to go back and really just get a solid footing on where the Turtles are headed and what's this new status quo they have. And so I went to Comixology, and thankfully on Comixology Unlimited they had just released all the issues for this trade, so I was able to just read through those. And those are issues 101 through 105. I read up to 106, and they were excellent. I was a huge fan. As I said on the podcast before, Sophie's art is like a perfect match for the Ninja Turtles. She has a great handle on anthropomorphic figures, and just with her usual already great cartooning and ability to convey expression with such a variety of animal faces and stuff like that. And her writing is really fun on this book too. So I'm just really excited to see where the Turtles go. I'm going to do some spoilers in case you haven't been caught up on the Turtles. But this new era starts off with Splinter has died. A huge portion of the city has been mutated, so there's a whole lot more mutants out there, and there's already like kind of just like a mutant scene, a mutant community, and there's good actors and bad actors in this community, and the Turtles themselves are kind of fractured and split up, and this whole first few issues here are kind of them finding their way back to each other, finding their purpose again. And a lot of it is kind of like slice of life stuff that's happening in their community, and just one issue they go to a concert and just that kind of stuff, and just these interactions between these characters. And I could read a book just like this, just I know this is kind of a calm before the next storm and the next big event or the next heavy action stuff, but just issue after issue of just these characters just hanging out and doing stuff and their own interpersonal dramas. I could totally read this all the time. It's great. So yeah, I highly recommend you go to Comixology or your local comic shop and pick up the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Reborn Volume 1. So for my music recommendation this week, I am going with something that is actually not technically metal. It's actually not metal at all, but you would be hard pressed to find any metal head that's just not been influenced by this gentleman's work, be it his music or his films, and that is John Carpenter's Lost Themes 3. I'm a pretty decent fan of synthwave and that kind of synthy soundtrack stuff. I like listening to it. It brings back a lot of like nostalgic feelings to watching stuff from the 80s and things like that, and also just it puts me in a good headspace when I'm creating or I'm trying to relax, or if I'm just doing something that kind of music really it helps me like glide into a good space pretty easily. And I'm a big fan of John Carpenter's films. I can't say I love every single one of them equally, but The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China are always somewhere in my top 10 films all time, and they won't be going anywhere soon. So on top of that, I've always admired how he did his own soundtracks, and he composed that classic Halloween theme, and he's just an amazing composer and an amazing director, and he's called the master of horror, and he's pretty much the master of synth too. I was a very big fan of the Lost Themes Volume 1 and 2, and this one is certainly no exception. I think it's the best of the three. He's really just kind of just hitting all the right points on every single track, and he again has collaborated with his son Cody Carpenter and Daniel Davies for writing this album, and it's just so solid. It makes you kind of wish there were movies to go with these songs. It's so good. But the fun part is there are no movies to go with this, so you kind of have more freedom to let those songs take you where your brain's going to go, and help develop your ideas and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to hopefully one night of working, just throw on Volume 1, 2, and 3 all at once, and just kind of getting lost in that while I'm doing some writing or some art. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I cannot recommend this album enough. Again, it's not technically metal, but I don't care. It's my podcast. I can do what I want. In terms of my favorite track, they're all great. I have to go with Weeping Ghost though, because I think that just best signifies and encapsulates everything that this album is about and the other albums are about. And if you don't like this, then you're not going to like these albums, and I'm sorry you have bad taste. And now for my guest, the indomitable Steve Bryant. Steve has been a constant in my creative life since I've gotten back into comics, and it's always awesome to see him working on stuff. He's like the Energizer Bunny. He just does not stop. He keeps going forward. He handles, adversity and hiccups and, bumps in the road like no one I know. He just keeps moving forward. He keeps adapting, he keeps changing, and he does it without compromising his stories, his vision, and what he wants to do. And I'm in awe of that. I'm, proud to call this guy a friend. I, am just lucky. Like so many people I've mentioned before on this show, I'm just lucky to know this person. And he's an amazing creator. He's got an awesome new Kickstarter that's, thankfully already been funded. So now it's just pushing it further and further, see where we can go. So we talk a bit more about that and a whole bunch of stuff. We talk about, a lot of music talk, a lot of good comic talk, and a lot of good crowdfunding kind of history stuff too. Because Steve's been doing Kickstarter since, I believe he says later in the show, 9 months after its existence. So you're going to be very hard pressed to find anyone else who's been doing it that early and is still doing it now. So Steve's a great guy. This has been way overdue to have him on, and it's certainly not going to be the last time I have him on. So I hope you enjoy it. Steve Bryant, let's go. All right, Steve. So, you're like the first literal creator I've ever got the nerve up to go and talk to at a convention. And, since then I've been, incredibly blessed to be able to call you friend, and we've had tons of great conversations, and we've, made plans to do things together and all that stuff. And, I just have been, as I said before, blessed to kind of, had you be my entry into actually talking to creators and all that, because you were so great and personable and nice, and it just, made, my supreme anxiety and just antisocial tendencies just kind of melt away a bit more. I mean, I was still covered in flop sweat after our conversation, but it kind of broke that ice for me that eventually, now I'm on here, asking people, hey, let's go talk for, an hour and a half, as opposed to, just oh, yeah, your art's cool, man. It's cool. So we have a lot of stuff to talk about, though. You're doing a lot of great things. You've done a lot of great things, and this is a long time coming. But first, Steve Bryant, comics, coffee, metal. What are you digging right now?
Comic wise, I finally got caught up on Joshua Williamson and I'm going to mispronounce it. Andrea Bresson's Birthright from Image. I don't know if you've checked that out, but it's a terrific book. And I've also kind of found myself going back to the Fountainhead and enjoying stuff that I had read 30, 40 years ago, that I, since gotten rid of from my collection. The Simonson Thor run, Miller's Daredevil, just kind of looking at that. Cause when I read it originally, I was reading it as, a high school kid.
Yeah.
And now coming back and looking at it and looking at the craft of it, it's been a lot of fun because I've focused so much, in recent years on looking at creator-owned stuff, and I've gone down my rabbit holes with certain artists that I obviously try to emulate. That I had kind of forgotten about the craft of a lot of my formative guys. So yeah, it's been kind of fun, balancing that with, like I said, catching up on series like Birthright and stuff like that.
So that's interesting that you've kind of gone back, as you mentioned that you're reading the Thor, Simonson Thor, and the Frank Miller Daredevil as it's coming out, and it's now these mainstays, these foundations of what's considered these epic classic runs in comics. But I'm sure as you're reading it, as a teenager, you're like, oh, this is going to be a classic book, that's going to withstand the test of time. It's just no, this is just some really cool stuff. And
well, oh, yeah.
so
Continue. I'm
so
sorry.
it's interesting because now I'm getting to the point, you know, where the stuff I grew up on and I read has hints of that. Like there's just, you know, there's like the X-Men Age of Apocalypse, which is, some people absolutely hate it, but you know, it's considered this huge milestone in the X-Men canon, and it's, you know, got a lot of nostalgic fondness, and you know, there's a lot of great stuff in there. You know, for sure. It's just I'm getting to that point where I'm like, I'm looking back at the stuff I read, and I'm like, wow, this stuff is really considered like, you know, mainstay. Like, oh, if you're into this character, you got to read this. You know, like if you're into Daredevil, people are going to be handing you Born Again. You know,
And yeah, I mean, sometimes I don't know if this is the case with you, but yeah, you kind of look and you're like, well, that can't be a, you know, a staple of what you should be reading, or that's not a classic. It's not that old. And then you go, oh crap, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago,
Oh, yeah.
20 years ago or more. And suddenly, you know, that does kind of put it into perspective.
yeah. It's I saw someone make an offhand comment of like, oh man, the, you know, 30th anniversary of Age of Apocalypse is going to be cool. I wonder if they're going to do something in a few years. And I'm like, a few years? What? Like, what are you talking? And it's just like, oh my god, it's not that. It's like, oh man, I feel so old because I have so many other things in my life that make me feel so old. It's just like, wow, I just can't, like, I just remember going and picking up those issues, you know, after school, and like just the newness and the freshness of the whole event and all that. So it's just like, how can this be this classic thing that everyone's looking back on? And kind of crazy.
Well, yeah, I have kind of the same experience thinking about like the James Robinson, Tony Harris, Starman stuff. That's closing in on 30 years. You know, the Jack Knight storyline, and that's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it's cool. It's nice that it's like, oh wow, these things I really liked. It's like, oh, they're considered, you know, I really liked them because they are, you know, objectively, supposedly, you know, as objective as that stuff can be, considered great, and these amazing milestones of this, you know, creators or this character's canon. So yeah, it's I'm getting the pull to start like pulling out some of my old stuff now and reading it, and kind of like wondering if I'm going to be seeing it through different eyes, knowing the legs it's gotten. So I'm interested. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this, on some of these stories you're going back to and kind of like picking apart the craft now that you have the experience.
It's just really cool to look at, like you can see where Miller is starting to play with time visually, and the way he does that, or Simonson's rhythms are really fascinating to me too. You know, just the way, again, when these guys are writing and drawing for themselves, especially, you know, during the 80s Marvel stuff, I would assume it's kind of scripting as you go, and it's just a fascinating rhythm. I would love to know more about like just how they structure the pacing for it. It's fascinating to me, and I don't even know if that makes sense, but just kind of like looking at the page and Miller doing these narrow, tall, almost staccato beats within the story. It's fascinating, and then you kind of look and see him go toward like 12 and 16 panel grid pages in Dark Knight, but you can kind of start to see some of that developing, obviously in his Daredevil run, but also like Ronin being a big stepping stone. And that's one of the things that when it came out, I totally did not get. And it was Jason Copeland talking about it so much while he's working on Full Tilt that I'm like, well, I need to to go back and revisit Ronin, and it's been fascinating too. So, all of that.
I have not read Ronin. I've read the other stuff, but I have not read Ronin. I'll have to go check that out because I respect your opinion. I respect Jason's opinion. And, if you're both like, yeah, this is the stuff, I should definitely go check that out. So
it's a really interesting thing because it's not the Miller that you see in Daredevil. But if you look at Daredevil and you look at Dark Knight and wonder how you got from point A to point C, Ronin is that transitory piece. I still don't know that I get it. It didn't totally click with me, when I was a high schooler. I just wanted Miller doing superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
But it just feels dense because, that's when he's starting to explore a lot of the rhythm of the smaller panels and stuff. I don't know if I'm making sense. I keep going back to rhythm. I should probably be quiet.
No, it makes perfect sense. You're talking about just, experimenting with storytelling and, using, instead of, being all bombast, he's starting to incorporate these smaller panels, creating these, it can really create a lot of tension. It can create a lot of, it can hype you to certain details or just little things. It kind of belies like a lot more thought happening and a lot more planning going on. So it's like it adds kind of this like a visual indicator of like there's more going on here than you think. So maybe you pay attention.
Yeah, it's a fascinating deep dive, and it's really fun to kind of look at the way I feel like the 80s were this kind of really cool semi-auteur period in Marvel and DC books, because you had Miller on Daredevil and Simonson on Thor, Byrne on the FF, and Wolfman and Perez on the Teen Titans. And every one of those things, every one of those books had a very distinct flavor, and each artist on it was starting to like push where their storytelling is going. Miller using small panels is really different than Perez using small panels, because it's very ornate in the Perez stuff, and yet it's really it always feels more like it's about the rhythm and the sense of time and pacing in the Miller stuff. And so I mean, that's just my take. There are people far smarter than me that have probably broken this stuff down in a much better way. But like I said, I'm revisiting this stuff after not being with it for so long that it's been revelatory to look at it with new eyes instead of, experiencing it as a kid when it came out.
No, it makes total sense to me. It's you did have all these, artists kind of just expanding beyond the grid, that, in the 70s and late 60s, you kind of had artists just becoming more refined. You had, like John Buscema and, Kirby definitely did his thing and went out there, but he was still Kirby. And you have this like refinement of like style. Because again, comics from the 50s don't look like the comics from the 70s.
Right.
So, and then the 80s, it's like, okay, let's start tapping this medium a little bit harder and pushing what we can do. And then you have kind of like the the black and white comics, underground boom kind of happening, and then that all comes to the head in the 90s, where you got all these, like all the creators you mentioned had these, I don't know if Simonson did anything creator owned.
Yeah, Star Slammers.
That's right, Star Slammers. But like in the 90s, like that all came to a head to where like they just took, their the stuff they've been building up to and just put it into their own stuff, and hopefully and rightfully made good money for it. With Miller with Sin City and Byrne had Next Men and all that, and you said Simons had Star Slammers, and I remember the first Walt Simonson book I ever purchased was actually like a Cyberforce book that he did.
Oh wow!
And because I was a huge Mark Silvestri, Top Cow, like that was my jam. So Cyberforce was definitely my team, and I remember just like not liking it at all, like this, because it looked nothing like the stuff I was into. And now I'm like, it's amazing. I'm a total Simonson fanboy about it. But it's just like at the time, it was just like, man, I was not learned enough.
Well, I mean, it's a similar thing for me as a kid. I grew up with Marvel in the 70s was doing reprint books of Spider-Man and the FF and stuff like that. And I grew up on Jack Kirby, his FF stuff as reprints, and Jack Kirby on Commandy. And I totally did not get Joe Kubert. Because I was so used to, the slick Mike Royer and Joe Sinnott inks on Jack, and the blocky, solid qualities of the figures that, Kubert's gestural, dynamic, fluid figure work looked sketchy and unfinished to my eye, because it was so removed from my experience at the time. And yeah, it wasn't until, late teens, early 20s that, the light bulb goes off. You hear the angels sing and it's like, oh, I get it. And so, yeah, I think we all have those kinds of blind spots as kids that, or young adults or whatever, where we don't get somebody, and then suddenly the switch is tripped, and you're like, oh my God, this is genius work.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've covered comics.
Yes.
So what are you drinking these days? What gets the Steve Bryant choo choo train chugging?
Well, I'm not a coffee guy, but my caffeine intake is. And I don't know if I can sound more white trash in saying this, but Diet Mountain Dew. And then for since we're in the middle of our polar vortex here in the Midwest, when I have to take the dog out for a walk, chai tea is always really good when I come in.
Awesome. Yeah, I like chai tea. Chai tea's good. I enjoy tea just as much as coffee. It's just you get that hook. It gets its hooks in you. And when you find you find a good one and one you like, it's just there it is. But yeah, I can't say I jive with the Diet Mountain Dew. I'm not a Mountain Dew guy. I am definitely a soda guy. Like I just recently just stopped as of yesterday. I'm like, I have to stop because I'm just drinking way too much soda right now. So I'm just cutting way back. But yeah, I'm more of a Diet Pepsi, Cherry Coke Zero, Diet Pepsi Cherry, whatever. That's more my jam. I never got the Mountain Dews. I maybe Code Red when I was younger.
That seems like a very younger thing.
Yeah. So,
I need to switch more to water, to be quite honest. I just sometimes you just get into these deadline grooves, and
yeah, you get your crutches. You get your crutches,
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I'm trying to more water, more tea, no sugar. See how that's going.
Trying to be good. Yeah.
We'll see how long that lasts. Until life hits me hard enough where I'm like, all right, just give me my damn soda. No, so okay. Yeah, and I've mentioned this before, but I was definitely not always a coffee guy, until my mid-20s. I was, cracking open the Diet Pepsis on the drive into work and stuff like that and drinking that all day. So yeah, I get it. I'm with you. So I know in terms of music, you're also not a huge metal guy, but I know what your favorite band is. I think
Yeah,
anyone who follows you on Twitter for at least a week will know what your favorite band is, and that is Rush. And
yes.
I am, there's the arguments: is Rush metal? I don't think they're metal, but they're definitely metal adjacent. There's definitely there's definitely a huge overlap with the fans. There's definitely a huge overlap with, certain Rush songs. You could easily classify as a metal song. So, I don't know if that's going to be your choice to talk about, but I'm letting you know right now, it's perfectly okay.
And any chance I get to, to sing the praises of, my favorite trio, I'll do that. But yeah. It's weird because, like one of the big things behind why I like that band so much is you could tell they were very influenced by what was going on around them, and they never let a particular limitation of like, this is what the band sounds like to limit them. It allowed for a lot of other integrations of other instrumentation, and like you can look at I feel like Caress of Steel is has some pretty metal moments in it. That could just be me, I suppose. And there's a bit of that in 2112, at least metal for the time, because I know, like any other genre, metal is going to evolve and change throughout, different decades. But I don't know. I feel like so much of Rush as a band kind of influences me as a creative, because like reading interviews with Geddy Lee or Neil Peart, just talking about kind of the purity of pursuing what moves you. And I know it probably sounds silly to some people to think you can apply that to making comics or whatever, but I just feel like that concept really resonates with me, and it carries over into my creative outlet.
No, I totally get it. And, Rush has always been a kind of band that has kind of, did what they felt like. There was an album they had out in the early 2000s, I remember, because my father-in-law, he was a Rush fan, or is a Rush fan, and he was
good man.
He was he was playing it, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the album. It came out in the early 2000s. But
Snakes and Arrows,
possibly,
or Vapor Trails.
I think Vapor Trails. I remember that having some really kind of heavy guitar stuff. At least my memory is telling me that.
Yeah. Particularly the opening track, "One Little Victory," I think would
that
fit the bill of what you're talking about.
That sounds definitely familiar. So it's like, with Rush, like I'm not in the camp where I can really take Geddy's voice for very long. And it's not a criticism, because I think they're all amazing musicians. I totally respect what they do. It's just, and I do like some Rush songs for sure. It's just that it's just one of those things where it's like, I can't listen to too much of it. But I think in the later stuff, when his voice is kind of toned down a little bit.
Oh yeah.
And I kind of mentioned this. I kind of mentioned this when I was getting into Dio and stuff like this before. It's like, once their voice kind of like ages a little bit and it's not so piercing, I can start to appreciate it, and then I can go back and I can be like, okay, I'm okay with this now. Like,
well, I think part of it, like the real shift for them, would be from Permanent Waves on, because Hemispheres, the album right before that, was written entirely in the studio, and so there wasn't the kind of breaking it in, playing while singing period for it. And he realized, according to the interviews, he realized that oh crap, this is in a key where I have to sing higher than, mortal man to make this stuff work. And that's where you get the super, super screechy stuff. Some of that, even as a fan, I'm like, it's not my favorite.
Yeah, it's it's all stuff I can, at least as a musician, appreciate. And you're a musician as well. I know you play bass. I don't know if you've been playing recently, but I know you have played bass in the past.
Yeah, I'm a recovering bass player is what I call myself. It's been 20, 25 years. I've got a Hamer Cruise bass that I had, that was probably the last bass I had. Well, it is, because it's in my storage room. I had a Fender Jazz for a long time, traded it in for a Rick 4001. I should have never gotten rid of the Rickenbacker, but I did, because I wanted something that was a little more flexible in terms of like being more of a slap bass as well.
Yeah, a Rickenbacker sounds like a Rickenbacker, and it's good for two things. It's good for playing Rush riffs, and it's good for playing Motorhead riffs.
And yes, don't forget, yes, you've got that.
Oh yeah, yes, I'm sorry,
Squire
Chris
sound.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, it has that flatter neck, and yeah, I never should have gotten rid of it because it was a beautiful, beautiful bass. It had a Leo Kwan badass bridge on it. And yeah, I loved that bass, and now I'm sad.
maybe one day you'll get another Rickenbacker. You'll look across it. I'm not a huge Rickenbacker fan, but they have these stealth ones that are just all black. Everything's black on it, and like that just looks really sharp. Like oh,
that's fun.
I'm just like, and I'm looking at the price, and I'm like, oh man, like, do I really need both kidneys?
Yeah, see, I would embarrass myself playing again. So, maybe it's best for me to just think back to my past and think I was better than I was.
Well, these days though, it's a lot easier to kind of get back into that type of thing, because I had fallen off of music for quite a few years, and in the past 5 years, I kind of fell right back into it, recording and stuff, and there's lots of great tutorials, lots of like tips, and our buddy Mike Norton, he's been relearning.
I know, I see him post about that on Twitter.
And he's getting back into it, and it's there's a lot more tools out there, just to kind of make it a lot easier for everybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't give it up completely. Though I know you're a very, very busy man. I wouldn't give it up completely.
Maybe I'll go back to it.
I do want to ask, aside from Rush though, what is like that next band right under Rush for you?
Probably the Beatles. Paul McCartney was such a melodic player. Again, I think in terms of bass players and structuring songs around that. So yeah, a lot of like Beatles stuff, primarily like the Rubber Soul through Revolver period, like right before Sgt. Pepper, when everything is expanding, but it hasn't gone full blown, production.
Yeah,
is really fascinating to me. Paperback Writer and Rain, and like I said, all of the Revolver album just has this really interesting vibe to it. So I'd probably say that.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I was in a band in the early 2000s, and it was very much like an older school rock and roll band. And I for a quick minute, I was like eyeing up one of those viola basses.
Oh, the Hofners?
Yeah. And well, not necessarily the Hofner. There's this Fender Guitars has a sub company called Squire, which is for more budget friendly.
Yeah.
And from there, under Squire is this band called Rogue, or this brand called Rogue. I don't even know if it exists anymore. But at the time, that's what that bass was. It was like $300. It was still like $300 though, or something like that. And I'm just like, being 18 and not entirely sure if I even liked being in this band. I was like, right. But it would fit the image so well.
But yeah, I never knew anybody that played like one of those hollow body basses. and I didn't know if that would be like a feedback issue or not. But sometime when the pandemic's over, we need to get together, and I'll bring the. I don't mean to circle back to Rush again, but the Geddy Lee's Big Beautiful Book of Bass is a gorgeous coffee table book, and it would be fun to go over it with someone else.
Yeah, I've heard that book mentioned a few times. I think our other buddy Crank, I think he's mentioned it quite a few times on his podcast. Just kind of going through that. It's just like an extensive like encyclopedia of bass, which
and he. Oh
no, go ahead.
You go.
No, go ahead.
Well, he interviews a number of terrific players, and they kind of document some just beautiful instruments, some from his collection and others that he just tracked down for the book. And yeah, it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, you mentioned a hollow body bass. I think around the same time they released the Epiphone. I think released a Jack Cassidy.
Oh yeah.
I think it was like almost like an ES. Was it 335 or whatever those guitars are? And I remember seeing that, and that looked really cool. I'm gonna have to, excuse my typing. I'm gonna have to look this up. Bass Epiphone, because yeah, Epiphone Jack Cassidy signature bass. It looks like one of the like those ES body types, the big old honkin',
Yeah.
And they had like a gold top version with one pickup, and it was just like, wow, that looks like so classic, and so like it would have fit the vibe of that band I was in so time. But I've actually heard a lot of great things about that bass, so just how well they were made and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I don't know if they would have like crazy feedback issue. I guess if you're not really using a lot of gain or anything like that, you probably wouldn't experience anything like that. But then again, I'm a metal guy, so eventually if I have I have a bass in my hand, I'm going to be slapping some sort of distortion on it or something at some point. So, so I've mentioned you're a busy guy, and I don't say that lightly. I know you've been a very busy guy in recent years. You've gone back to school. You've gotten your master's.
Yeah.
You've started teaching.
Yes.
And you're still making your comics. And right now you have and for the first time, it's great talking to somebody who has a funded Kickstarter going on right now. Not that we still don't need your support, listeners. Or we, I'm I'm hopping on this train like it's part of my stuff, but
don't tell them about the kickback.
So Steve has this Kickstarter for Athena Voltaire, your long-running series, your main creator-owned book, because you have a couple other floating out there as well, The Catch and Ghoul Scouts, and but it's been funded, and you guys are just kicking all sorts of ass on it, and you got tons of great stretch goals coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about Athena and just a real quick, in case someone doesn't know what Athena is and what the story is?
Yeah, like an elevator pitch, right? Yeah, it's 19. I'm getting back into convention mode, I think here. It's 1930s pulp adventure, kind of Indiana Jones, but starring a woman pilot. So you've got Nazis, ancient artifacts, lost cities, monsters, explosions. Got to go with the explosions. Big action, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm a sucker for period pieces. So setting something in the 1930s is a lot of fun in terms of like research and clothing and just the general visual aesthetic is really appealing to me. And then the Kickstarter right now is for it'll be our 4th trade paperback.
Wow.
It's called The Terror on the Orient Express. So yeah, it takes Athena from the usual, globetrotting Indiana Jones type of adventure. It's in TV vernacular, it's a bottle episode. So you're trapped on the Orient Express. People start dropping like flies, but instead of a murder mystery, it's a little more of a claustrophobic type of horror thriller with a monster, kind of in the vein of like Alien or The Thing.
So, given that previous Athena stories have been these big, globe-trotting, just ultra pulpy adventure stories, what was the was there like a major impetus to like say, I want to scale this back, put her in this really tight confined space, and give her, kind of like take away a lot of the usual or familiar surroundings that she has with her stories and all that, and just kind of like really condense it down to this, as you said, kind of like this bottle episode where it's like you're just almost claustrophobic and trapped. Is that something like you're like actively like, I want to craft a story this way, or is it just kind of like, you're just in the shower one day, you're like, oh wait.
Well, no, it was a very conscious choice. So around the time I went back to school, I licensed Athena Voltaire to Action Lab, and they offered, hey, would you want to do this? And since I knew I would be in school and not able to produce on, a super regular schedule, the deal was I would write it, they would get other artists to draw it, and I could still provide covers and, manage it and stuff like that. And originally I wanted to alternate story arcs, and this comes from when Al Williamson and Archie Goodwin were doing the Secret Agent Oregon newspaper strip. They would do like a traditional spy story, and then they would intersperse it with whatever kind of weird adventure stuff Al wanted to do. So, it would be like a spy story, and then they would do something with dinosaurs. And then they'd do a spy story, and then it's an alien invasion. And it was really fascinating to kind of look at that. So I thought, so that this won't become stale, not everything has to be Raiders, because, you can do a murder mystery. You can do The Thin Man. You can do Cthulhu type of horror. And so I was going to make the Orient Express the second story arc. So, you've got Globetrotting, and then the Orient Express, and then Globetrotting, and then the one after that was going to be, is going to be a story set in 1930s Hollywood. And so I ended up doing two of the indie style adventures back to back, the Sorcerer Pope and the Golden Dawn. So yeah, I wanted to break them up in the way that like Goodwin and Williamson did. And it's also just kind of, if you look at a lot of the novels and the movies from that period, there are so many great things to draw from. I always point out like the Thin Man movies with that kind of, quick-witted banter, screwball comedy stuff, which, you can tell obviously influenced Lucas in like how Indy and Marion would talk, stuff like that. So, wanting to kind of pull some of these other influences in, and, do, like I said, doing a story in Hollywood is also kind of a nod to The Rocketeer, another big influence on me. So, the Orient Express story kind of grew out of wanting to not just be formulaic and go, how many world hotspots can we hit and superimpose a plane against a map with a red line showing where we're going. Because I love that trope.
Yes.
And I love that kind of story, but I don't want to bore the reader. So if I can expand it and do, something that feels like a a whodunit, or something that feels like, a noir, or something that, is a rip-roaring Hollywood yarn, or, mix any of these idioms together, I want to try that. So that's a really long answer to your very short question.
Well, it's a really great answer, and I think it's a really awesome idea, and it's great to, because you mentioned just the globe trotting and the red line going over the map, the plane. Like, I love that stuff too. Like, who doesn't? Who's not a fan of? Whoever's a fan of like Indiana Jones and all that, who doesn't have just get a little giddy when you see stuff like that? And movies don't do that a lot these days. I think the closest they came was the first Mummy with Brendan Fraser. I think
I loved all three of those.
The second one was all right. Shoddy. Dwayne Johnson, Scorpion King aside. The third one, I haven't revisited since the first time I watched it. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but mainly the first one though. They really kind of captured that spirit. But I think it's really smart of you to say okay, let's take this character that's been well established for almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
And let's start telling different stories with this character and putting her in different situations, because that just will show us how well developed this character is, and you're growing as an artist, as a person, and as a writer. So it's you're not going to want to, as much as you love these things, you're not going to want to do that all the time. Not every story is going to be about punching Nazis, as fun as that is.
Right.
But I think it's awesome that you're thinking along those lines of okay, let's start mixing it up. Let's start doing some crazy and different stuff.
Oh, thank you.
And I have to say, the art I've been seeing from this, it's, again, when I want to say the first we met at Wizard World 2008. Wow, is it then? You know what? I know exactly when you were. It was shortly after you came out the 11 O'Clock Comics podcast with your first Athena Kickstarter.
Oh, okay. So that would have been 2010.
2010. Okay, so 10 years. So 10
wow.
years we've known each other, and it's been awesome to see you just keep plugging away and keep making your books. And I think you were always refining yourself and all that, but I think a lot during the past couple of years your style has really come into the best I've seen you do. Just some of the stuff you've been showing about the Athena stuff that's the best work of yours. And I always thought your work was good, of course, but it's Steve's hitting the next level with your art.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you. And yeah, secondly, it's this volume. I'm not drawing the whole thing. I've got the cover, and I've got this framing sequence in the first chapter, and I got to do a bunch of inks in the second chapter, and it's been a lot of fun because I'm gearing up for the next volume, because I want to do a Kickstarter each year. So I've got the next one written, and I've been kind of revisiting my older stuff going, oh God, this is horrible. I'm so much better now. So I'm really excited to come back and draw it again, after taking the time off while I was in school. So thank you for the kind words on it. And I'm super excited to get back to it really, deeply.
Yeah, I'm also just excited to see you out there, and drawing again, because as great as it was to see just doing all these things, going back to school and having these huge busy life things happening, and you're still writing and you're getting your characters out there. I know you as an artist, and whenever you're posting more art and stuff like that, I'm always feeling okay, cool, I'm happy for Steve. I'm happy to see more Steve Bryant art in the world. So speaking of people who are happy to see Steve Bryant, we have some Twitter questions.
Woohoo!
Our first one, I guess it's more of a question for me, but it's from previous guest and friend of the show, and provider of all my caffeine through his fantastic Rootless Coffee company.
Yeah.
John O'Deener. He's asking if I can say sup for him. So, Steve, sup.
Sup right back at you.
John, Jono's got some cool stuff coming out. He's always good for a good chuckle. We have our mutual buddy John Westhoff, and again, former guest and perennial question asker, Anti-Drummer on Twitter. Steve, what's your creating schedule look like after your full-time job? How do you set boundaries?
Very poorly. Right now I work in a marketing department, in a corporate marketing department, and I'm an adjunct professor at Illinois State, teaching one class. So my schedule is kind of up in the air, but I try to get a couple hours in each evening. My partner is super patient. She doesn't mind if I've got my iPad with me. Mm-hmm. So while we're, watching TV or whatever, I'll be trying to plug away on a page or layouts or whatever. And, getting a few hours on the weekend and stuff like that. So it's usually pretty slow going, but, we all take the little holes of time where we can get them. And I swear the iPad has been the greatest tool for me, just because, back when we still had civilization before the pandemic, I could take it with me to get an oil change or a tire rotation, and I could be working on comics then as well. So it's really just trying to be organized and always making sure I'm ready to be able to, steal 15 minutes or a half hour in that manner.
If readers only knew how many comics actually got made thanks to patient partners and patient and understanding partners.
Absolutely.
And these stolen 15, 20 minutes or throughout the day, they would be astounded.
It's so true.
So, cause I'm totally in that boat. I got the iPad just under a year ago, and I've been able to produce a lot more than I probably would have with this whole scenario in the world going on right now than not if I didn't have it. So, and of course, having a patient and understanding partner as well.
God bless them. Yeah, that's just been the biggest thing is having somebody that's supportive and gets it, that you have this compulsion that you need to get these stories or these visuals out into the world, and they understand that it's part of your psyche.
Yeah, definitely. Our next and final set of questions come from Kirk Spencer at Big5Army on Twitter.
Hi, Kirk.
Well, I think we kind of answered the first one, the biggest influences on ATHENA VOLTAIRE. I don't know if there's something you want to expound upon with that, but you kind of mentioned the Rocketeer, the pulpy stuff with Indiana Jones and all that.
Well, yeah, I mean, artistically, Dave Stevens, mm-hmm. Al Williamson, and Mark Schultz, who's the writer-artist behind Xenozoic. Those are like my big three. And then, you've got like some Wally Wood in there, and Paul Gulacy is a big influence on me. Tim Bradstreet. Tim was such an influence during my formative years when I first started working in role-playing games. Tim was still in town here, and he showed me how to ink with a brush and just all kinds of stuff that has paid dividends in the years since. So I'd say those are the big ones for me.
Okay. How awesome is it drawing Sergeant Rock? For our listeners, man, Kirk is a huge Sergeant Rock fan and has many, many amazing drawings from many amazing artists of the character.
Sergeant Rock is fun to draw, but give me a Sergeant Fury commission sometime, Kirk.
You hear that? All right, Steve's accepting commissions. And the last one is, do you think crowdfunding is a fad or the future?
Okay, now this is actually kind of interesting, and I can bore you to death with this. In grad school, I had to write one paper in my human-machine interaction class, and I chose to write it on the way that crowdfunding and the internet in general have kind of eliminated, in some ways, the need for a middleman, a publisher, mm-hmm. or a record label and stuff like that. And my go-to story on this, because it fascinates the hell out of me, is have you ever read the Theory of 1,000 True Fans?
Yes.
Okay. And, all the criticism since that was written, I think in like 2008, the criticism of it, that it's unsustainable and stuff like that. So while I'm researching this paper, I'm looking at, a lot of the writers that were behind like early Kindle writing and stuff like that. I'm looking at comics crowdfunding. I'm looking at musicians, how they've used it. And I come across a bunch of really fascinating information from the British progressive rock band Marillion. And it turns out, they had one hit in the 80s, but, otherwise they were largely, a niche prog rock band. And apparently by the late 90s, they'd been dropped by their American label. They still had the label in the UK. And the keyboard player is lurking on Marillion, like, computer bulletin boards, forums, and people are asking about why the band doesn't tour the US anymore. And he outs himself and says, well, we don't do this because we don't have a label there anymore. And, we don't have the money to mount a North American tour. And the fans took it upon themselves. They created an escrow account and raised like $60,000 for the band to do the tour. And the band, gave everybody tickets to, the nearest show, nearest them, and everybody got to do a meet and greet. And they funded a tour in 1999, a full decade before Kickstarter existed, like before crowdfunding existed, as we know it. And the band was so successful with that. They've used that to fund all of their subsequent albums. And they've gone so far as to, again, pre-pandemic, they were throwing their own conventions, fan conventions. I think they called it like a Marillion weekend. And they would, for whatever the cost of it is, the fans would buy a ticket to the convention and get 3 separate concerts out of it with totally different set lists, meet and greets, and, there would be vendors and all that stuff. And I bring this story up because they've been crowdfunding now for 20 years. And I feel like part of the key aspects of crowdfunding is just creating a relationship with your audience, a respectful relationship. I think there are some people that treat their audience like an ATM. Mm-hmm. And God, I never want to be that kind of person, because I'm grateful when I get to see the same faces every year at San Diego and C2E2, or even, on Twitter and Facebook. It's gratifying to me. And I think crowdfunding is a great way, if you are into relationship building, that you can possibly sustain a career just by having that relationship with your audience. So I don't think it's a fad. I guess no, not a fad. That's the short answer.
That's an amazing story, and the theory of the 1,000 true fans. I think it was 1,000 true fans who will spend $100 on you in a year,
yeah,
or something like that, and it'll keep you sustained for life or whatever. That's proving to be very much the point. You have Patreon, you have Kickstarter, you have Indiegogo, you have these systems now. These organized systems in place now that are cutting out the middleman of publishers. And now even publishers are like, oh, we need to get on this too. You have was it Boom doing the Keanu Reeves book, or a few Archie comics.
Well, it's huge with game publishers too.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes sense. Having worked at 2 different game publishers, a boxed game is a really pricey thing that you don't want it to flop. Mm-hmm. So, being able to as a publisher do it as a Kickstarter and functionally do it as a pre-order system, I think is going to keep companies in business. And I just realized I stepped all over you and interrupted you. So
no, it's fine. It's just you brought up an excellent point. Like, there's all these other industries besides comics that are just like fully taking advantage of this, and there's a lot of tech stuff that's a lot more tricky, a lot more hits, misses and hits, I think, with a lot of tech stuff that's being kind of pushed and out there. But it's kind of also innovating a lot of things, but it's also creating a lot of self-made creators, and a lot of self-sustainable creators, in that you're learning how to do everything. So he's like, well, why do I need this other person? Why do I need, even though the Kickstarter I ran wasn't funded fully, in the whole interim, everything, I found out where to find a printer. I found out where to find the best price. I found out what paper types I prefer to use, or, all these things, and all these other avenues of, like, preparing an actual book for print, and these things I've never done before, that, normally the publisher would come and take their cut. So I was able to put out, eventually able to put out my own, book to, a couple hundred people, and I didn't have to, like, I was able to make a profit off of it because I didn't have to pay someone else to do all this other work. And and a lot of those people I got were from the Kickstarter that didn't get funded. They still want to support the book. So once I found a way to do it without Kickstarter, it was, they were still there, and I was extremely grateful for that. But, like you said, it's just, this band Marillion's been doing it for 20 years. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
People want what they want, and if they're people who they're patronizing and they're, giving their support and, pay it back in the manner that, they're happy with and respectful, like, it's going to keep going.
Well, yeah, and I think there is a bit of a gap. My Kickstarter, while it's doing amazingly well, better than anything I've done before, it's not going to sustain me for an entire year. I'm not at that tier. So if that's what you're looking for out of a Kickstarter or out of crowdfunding, it's definitely not here for everybody. But if you're looking for a feasible way to put your content out into the world and, give yourself a few bucks from the campaign and have books to sell at shows for the next decade, those books will eventually also return your investment of time. And if they're paid for by the Kickstarter campaign, that's all effectively profit that you're getting from the, the campaign. So yeah, I mean, it's not the direct kind of thing like, well, this will, cash my ticket and, I can quit all the day jobs or whatever. But it all comes down to how you define success,
Yeah.
I suppose.
And well, it lets you create and get your thing out there and potentially have a financial gain.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
Every creator learns very quickly. That financial gain is something that can be just a baby crawl. You're going to be in the red for a while, trying to do this unless you're very lucky. But even the most talented people, there's a lot of risk. So doing something where your fans can come back and keep supporting you, and you mentioned you want to do a Kickstarter every year, and you've done a few. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many you've done.
We've done 3 for the Catch since 2019. And yeah, the nature of that book is, even though Ishmael and I own it jointly, I want to get him a page rate.
Yeah.
So, we kickstart each issue so that he can complete the work on that. Eventually I'd like to do a trade. But with the Athena stuff, my goal is to spend a year, doing, essentially a graphic novel, a single story, and then each year do a Kickstarter for it where, if you've been buying the book in single issues, there will be a package where you can get it as single issues. There will be a package where you can get a trade. Pretty much the structure that we've got with the Orient Express campaign is what I want to do going forward, and yeah, do it each year.
And you kind of mentioned like something that I was also wanted to bring up is the way, because a couple years ago, because like I mentioned, we've known each other for 10 years now, and like I heard of you because you were talking about a Kickstarter on a podcast 10 years ago, and at that time, I think 90% of what you had to do whenever you're talking about it was explain what Kickstarter is.
Yeah.
So first, let's appreciate the fact that, for the most part, you can say that's a Kickstarter. Like, oh, okay. Most people kind of get the idea of what it is. But even as short as a couple years ago, people funding single issues on Kickstarter was considered a huge no-no.
Yeah.
And now it kind of seems to be like everyone seems to be kind of like turning that tide to where it's like, no, that's cool. Like, come back, we'll come back for, and some people do it differently. Some people say we're kickstarting the first issue, but as we reach these stretch goals, you'll be funding the next few issues, blah, blah, blah. There's a recent one that I backed, True Cult, that they were just printing the first issue and the rest were going to be all digital. And they blew past all their goals and all that stuff. And so I don't know if their plan is to try to print the rest or just, have the first issue as a print and the rest be digital. But there's so many ways you can do these things now, especially with, again, digital being so accessible to everybody. Because 10 years ago, not everybody had a tablet.
Right.
Now most people have tablets, at the very least. And even if you're just using it to read comics or whatever, you can get a pretty cheap tablet. Like the cheapest iPad's still, like $300, I think now. So it's just so many options to have with all this. And I was wondering what your kind of perspective of doing, like, I don't know how early in Kickstarter you were in Kickstarter's life you were doing this, but kind
9 months.
9 months. Okay. So I'm kind of curious, before we wrap up, like, what was your kind of perspective on this whole like decade of crowdfunding boom?
Well, the first Kickstarter, I was woefully unprepared, but I mean, everybody was trying to find their way at that point. And it took me forever to fulfill everything. And I felt guilty about it. And I kept saying, sending out updates. Mm-hmm. Well, the book's not done, but here, have another digital book of, other stuff I've been working on. I'm really sorry. And that went on far too long. But after I did that first campaign and I felt so guilty about the delays, I stayed away from it, which in retrospect, and after, writing that paper, I realized crowdfunding I should have stayed with it the whole time and grown with it rather than leaving and coming back, because it's wired for the way I interact with my audience. And that's been the biggest thing, is just looking at how I remember when that first campaign was going on. Yeah, I used the analogy. It's kind of like a PBS pledge drive, except instead of a tote bag, you're ordering comics.
Yeah.
And I don't have to say that anymore. So that's pretty cool. And, there have been a lot of people that have come since then that, like talking with the Action Lab guys, they started crowdfunding their series fairly early on. And Chad from Action Lab told me that, in his words, that he said, "We ripped off what you did on the Athena campaign." And they obviously improved upon that. But I think there's something to be said for that with every crowdfunder. I feel like in my mind, the person that really broke down the wall on single issues is Charlie Stickney from White Ash, which is also now at Scout Comics. Because if you look at how he was doing those campaigns, the first campaign is for issue 1, the second one is for issues 1 and 2, the third is for issues 1, 2, and 3. So every time there's a jumping on point for the audience. And I feel like after Charlie did that, you saw more and more people adopting that model. You look at what Tyler James does with the Comics Launch podcast.
Mm-hmm.
He's putting information out there all over the place. He's got sponsors like Gemini Comic Mailers, which I heard about through him, and they're fantastic for shipping these things out. So I got 1,000 mailers. But it feels like there are so many areas of resources now where creators can learn how to do a campaign. Everybody's a lot more savvy with it now. So I think it's easier to do this and fulfill it and not piss anyone off. Does that make sense?
No, total sense. And I would have, though I know you will, I wouldn't continue to beat myself up about not sticking with Kickstarter, because as you kind of mentioned, like you didn't deliver in the manner you wanted to deliver with the first one, and you had some kind of feelings about that. But I think that just speaks to your character of wanting to make sure that people who support you are getting, the absolute best and getting, exactly, what you promised them and more if you can. So, that's just, the type of person you are. You're going to, bust your ass to make sure that what you put out is the best possible work you can do, and it's worth every single penny plus more for people who are doing it. So I think the idea you have now is great. I think the approach you're taking now is great, and I would certainly, while it was a pleasant surprise that we get to talk and we're not at the point where like, well, you're not yet funded yet, but we're almost there. Even though stretch goals are hugely important for Kickstarters after they're funded, because every extra, thing that gets hit, it just, you have some great stuff it's just going to go right back into what people get. I mean, your pledge is your pledge. And so just the more people that are involved and getting in, and more people get more stuff. And
yeah, that's the beauty of it, right?
So, I won't be surprised, this time, whenever your next Athena Kickstarter is next year, that, it's the same conversation where you're like, wow, we funded really fast. Now, we get, we're going to work on delivering these awesome extras and stuff like that. I think you're really putting out that foundation, especially with the Catch Kickstarters and stuff like that. Like, you're well established with the birth of work, and even, quality aside, you're also like branching out in the types of stories you're doing. The Catch is nothing like Athena Voltaire, and even now Athena Voltaire is changing a bit. You're telling different stories that people might not expect. Not that you haven't done different stories with her before, but it's would you say this would be like the biggest shift in change of story or style of story for Athena?
I think so. I think so, and hopefully I'll be able to continue to bring the audience with me as I learn new things and try new things.
And you did kind of throw off. I don't know if this was serious or not, but like Athena with like a Cthulhu bent or something like that, and I'm like, my interest is definitely piqued with that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that one's coming.
All right. Well, I'll be here waiting.
Awesome.
So Steve, it's been a blast having you on. Before we go, can you let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find the Athena Kickstarter, and anything else you want to drop on everybody?
Well, it's easy enough on Twitter and Facebook and my much ignored Instagram that I need to get back to. All three of those, you can find me at Steve Bryant Art, SteveBryantArt. No underscores, no spaces, no nothing. And just look for Athena Voltaire on Kickstarter, and you should be able to find it. We're also a Kickstarter project we love.
That's awesome. That's a great tag to have. It really
I was thrilled.
It really boosts the algorithms and gets you in front of some more eyes. So that was awesome that you guys got that. Well, Steve, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks so much, Don.
Thank you for listening to the Comics Coffee Metal podcast. If you'd like to support the show, please consider subscribing via your favorite podcast player, sharing links to the episodes via social media when they post, or consider going to ko-fi.com/comicscoffeemetal. That's coffee.com/comicscoffeemetal. All funds raised for the show go towards equipment upgrades and promotion. Thanks for listening.